Good evening once again, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? We're back here with another episode of the Wisconsin Conservative Conversations. And as you guys know, we've been setting this up where we make it a point to talk to various candidates. We've talked to independents, we talked to Republicans, hardcore conservatives, and this tonight here we got a special show because we actually have a libertarian on here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because those of you guys that know me, I'm a bit of a nerd, and I say this in this context. Um, Growing up, I was real big into comic books and all this other stuff, and one of the things that I've kind of identified myself with over the years, and I think it's just as I get older too, is remember the character, the Incredible Hulk. And everybody remembers the Hulk for being angry and mad and Hulk smash. What a lot of people don't seem to understand, though, is the Hulk. One of the things that he was really big on was he just wanted to be left alone. And I think a lot of people, your right leaning libertarians, a lot of your conservatives, that's where a lot of people are at the end of the day. They just want to be left alone to prosper, to work with their communities, their families, to have a better future. And unfortunately, government is very intrusive that way, and it kind of prevents that. Tonight's going to get a really good opportunity, though, because how often do we get a chance to speak to somebody from a libertarian perspective? And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we're not only going to hear the libertarian perspective, but we're going to talk to a gentleman who is running for the 8th congressional seat. And he's also the chairman of the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. Let's welcome on board here, Jacob VandenPlas. Jacob, how are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful, and thank you for having me on tonight. Thank you.
No problem. And we're going to make sure we put your website right down there. I'd like to make it a point because I know campaigns are expensive. We need volunteers. And anytime people can go to that website, check out your platform, learn more about you, watch your videos, donate, volunteer, especially in this month of signatures,
Mm.
it's a big deal.
We need lots of help with signatures and spreading the word of liberty. And it's going real smooth so far. We've had tremendous support from the community, and it is growing one day at a time. Our membership at the state level is continuing to grow. Um, it's really heartwarming to see how many people are starting to come together to the libertarian message.
Mm.
And
Oh, it looks like you're cutting in and out here. There you go. I think we got you back. Let's see here. Hopefully you can still hear me. If you can hear me, try to let's see. Looks like it's okay. There we go. We got you back.
I still have that up north farm internet that doesn't work very fast all the time.
Oh, I remember that very well. Yeah, we had that real slow internet here up until I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been a game changer, that's for sure. But let's jump into
Oh
this
yeah.
here. So you're there's so many different angles to go with. And I guess we'll start with her first here. Let's talk a little bit about yourself. Who exactly are you? What
Yeah.
exactly, are you bringing to the table? Because I think when a lot of people that are not politically initiated, they don't know. So the best representative of anybody like that is certainly the candidate themselves.
Yeah. So it's sure. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Abrams, Wisconsin. Graduated from the great big city of
So we're cutting in and out again.
2000.
Sounds like we're cutting in and out here. The camera just froze up.
All
There we
right.
go. We got you back.
Yeah. Normally it's not this bad. This is a special night,
No, it's got to, when we're doing a live, it's got to
I
be,
guess.
kind of rough that way. Why not?
All right, is it going to work this time?
Yep, got you back.
All right. As soon as I graduated high school, I left for Fort Benning, Georgia for United States Infantry School, and I served 13 years in the Wisconsin Army National Guard with 2 tours in Iraq, 2005 to 2007, deployed right out of the Green Bay unit, Bravo Company 2 of the 127. Tremendous memories with that. Great people, and having the opportunity to serve our country was awesome. Currently, I am a truck driver and a farmer. I drive truck, deliver propane, and I also have a nonprofit organization, Door County Farm for Vets. This is our maiden year. So we train veterans on how to grow produce and live sustainably. So I've got an organic produce farm up here in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, and that's a whole other conversation we can have about
Certainly.
growing food and living sustainably. But it's quite an opportunity to be able to work with veterans and be able to teach and give back to our community. So our goal this year is to match dollar for dollar in the donations that we received. We'll be donating in produce back to the American Legions and VFWs within the Sturgeon Bay, Door County, and Kewaunee area. So it's
it's
going to
really
be a good project. Very, very excited for that.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned sustainable living, and then all one needs to do is walk out the door right now, go to a gas station, go to a grocery store. Hell, you can even go on to like Amazon and eBay. You see prices have just gone right through the roof, and it's kind of ridiculous because you want to talk about sustainable living. If more and more people took care of themselves and were able to farm their own produce and things like that, you wouldn't have to worry about issues over at the grocery store.
Correct. We're 2 generations. I still remember both my grandparents, both my grandpas on my mom's side and my dad's side. They had gardens in their backyard. They grew as much as they could, even in city lots. They were in downtown Green Bay, not very big lots, but guess what? You had to grow as much as you could to try to take a dent off of your pocketbook.
Right.
And we need to start getting back to that. That's a lost skill. I mean, we are now
Cutting in and out again. And folks, bear with us here because obviously our connection's kind of a little rough here tonight. There we go.
it's going to be a long show for us if it keeps cutting out on me.
It happens, it's one of those things. Is what can you do about it? You just got to roll with the punches. Okay, it's frozen again here. So like I said, just bear with us here. We got some internet problems, and we're gonna get them back on. But let's see. It usually takes about a minute or so. Trying to see if
All
it's an
right.
issue on my end. No, do we got you back?
I think so.
All right,
I'm not
there
gonna,
we go.
I'm gonna
There we go.
I'm gonna try to not move, and hopefully we'll stay connected.
See, it almost reminds me when you say that, I'm gonna try not to move. It's like, hey, don't move from the TV. Hold those bunny ears right there, just so you can get the reception there. But let's jump into, running in for the 8th Congressional District. Obviously, there's, Republicans, there's Democrats, the 2 major parties there. You yourself, you're jumping in here as a libertarian. What was kind of the motivation behind that? There we go. I see you moving now. Yep.
Think it might work on my phone.
It might. Just use the same link that I sent you through Messenger there. The miracle of technology is that when it works, it is freaking awesome. When it doesn't, we have very expensive paperweights. So just bear with us here. Let's see if Jacob can get onto his phone. Maybe he'll have a better connection that way. And again, guys, keep in mind, we got the website right down here, JakeLiberty2022.com. So if you want to see Jake VandenPlas's his website, you'll see it right there. So let's see if we can get Jacob back on here. We really want to have this conversation right now. His internet was a bit choppy, so we're going to work with this here. We're going to work with this as much as we can. One of the things I want to highlight to people too is when you guys get the opportunity, make sure you check out websites for these candidates. And I'm going to pull up his in particular right now while we're waiting for him to come on back in. And let's see. There we go. Perfect. So obviously you're going to see that right there. So, make sure you go check out these websites. When you get the opportunity, you can go ahead and check out their media, learn more about them, the events they have going on, their platforms. Like we'll go to the platform here, and I'm always a big fan of that because it goes over a lot of the things that a candidate is. Well, it's a summarization of what a candidate believes, the idea of, like, say, for example, gun rights, victimless crimes, healthcare. All these are issues that, of course, that are going to be important to a candidate and eventually the people themselves. So let's see if we can get Jacob back on here. We don't have him yet. Victoria, how are you? We'll go into the comments here. She mentioned here, I noticed that sometimes the video site lags. Happens to us on and off too. Yeah, and I think for Jacob, he was saying that he was having some issues just because of the rural nature of where he's at the moment. So we'll see how this goes. See if we can get him back on here. I am going to here. Let's do something else. While he's doing that, let me see if I can get. See if we can get a video to play here. There we go. I think we got it. And again, bear with us here as this loads up. All right, here we go.
Freedom, liberty, justice. What do they mean to you? Are these merely words lost to the pages of history books, destined for nothing more than to be catchy slogans politicians throw around to get elected? Or is it something so much more than that? Does it feel like justice for our neighbors, friends, and family members to be incarcerated, treated inhumanely, or even have their life taken? Is this what justice is supposed to look like? Is our individual liberty still respected, upheld, and represented? It's time we set politics aside and focus on principles that have always mattered. Now is the time. We are the ones. I am Jacob VandenPlas, and I'm not just asking you to vote for me for Congress in 2022. I'm asking you to vote for yourselves and for the power every one of us possesses to unleash the greatest potential.
And that is, Jacob's campaign right from his website there. One of the videos that you're going to find on there. Information, again, that I think is going to be very helpful to, the average person, to anybody for that matter, that's looking to get information on any candidates at this point. Let's see if he's got anything else, because I know he had a litany of videos here, and I want to get what we can here while we're waiting for him to come back on. Let's see here. Let's go with Meet Jake. There we go. Yeah, we're still waiting for Jacob to come on here. All right. The pup. Okay, let's see what else we got. I know he had more videos than this. All right, let me see something here. There we go. I think we got him back. All right, sir. I think we got you back here.
You see, we get the,
Yep. You're coming across. Your video is much better now. Can you hear us on your end? Interesting side note, we always do a sound check before the show starts. Everything was clicking off on all cylinders. The moment we press go live, we start having tech issues.
all right, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming across faint, but we can still hear you.
Is this a little better?
Yes, it's better.
I'm gonna have to hold the microphone. I can.
That'll work out.
Sorry about that, folks. We're up here a little bit in the Northwoods. Elon
It's
Musk
all right. As long as we get the message across, that's the important thing.
Oh yeah, Elon Musk has some cool toys coming our way here. So hopefully, once we get the Starlink set up, we'll be done dealing with these issues.
Oh, I am so waiting for that.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Just
That would like double my speeds.
Oh, right. So I think we, after about almost 20 minutes in, maybe we can get through my introduction here.
There we go. Well, let's talk about your race in the 8th Congressional District. Now, you're running for a congressional seat. You're running as a libertarian. What's the motivation for you jumping into a congressional race here?
The motivation, I think this is the only way that things can actually move forward in Washington, D.C. is by the addition of other parties. The biggest thing that I want to focus on in there is responsible government spending. Our dollar has been inflated by 96%. And this is a big thing that affects everybody's life. I mean, every single paycheck that I get, and also taxes, the amount of taxes that we're stuck paying is absolutely incredible. Every paycheck I get, I see the taxes coming out of there, and it makes me just cringe. So this is the stuff that we need to be focusing on. Our politicians in Washington, D.C. right now are currently bought by corporations. And that's on both sides. That's not unique to just Democrats and not unique to just Republicans, but we need to get the wealth and prosperity of this country back in the hands of the people where it belongs. And that's what I want to actively work towards.
Well, one of the things you mentioned too is, with just the spending that out of control spending that's going on. I mean, look what they just did here when they're looking at potentially sending $40 billion out to the Ukraine. Meanwhile, we're dealing with, a quasi economic collapse. I don't believe it's full collapse just yet, but give it time. Stock markets are tanking, the crypto markets are tanking, housing, interest rates keep going up. They've gone up 75 basis points within the last few months. And we're just handing out money to everybody like it's, like we're the ATM of the world.
Yeah, and that's one of the main causes of why we're seeing the inflation we're seeing. And they just keep dumping more and more and more and more and more. When's it going to stop? When are we the people going to finally become number one? Okay, right now, when we see our politicians voting, they're going to vote first for their donors. And that's what we're seeing right now. That money going over to Ukraine, every single person that has had a major donation from the military industrial complex voted yes on this bill. Okay, that keeps the military industrial complex moving and rolling. That's what it comes down to. It always comes down to the money. We've all heard the saying, if you want to find the truth, follow the money.
Follow the money.
And this is what it's come down to. I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to follow the money and I'm going to let the people know.
I think it's important that, you brought up the idea of the military industrial complex. And I think it's funny when especially younger generations hear phrases like that today, they think, oh man, that's just crazy talk. But that also shows that there's a failure to learn history, because it was Eisenhower who said during his departure speech, beware the military industrial complex.
Yep. Yeah. And right now, so don't get me wrong. I'm a veteran. I love our military. I think we should have a very strong, robust military. But I also don't think that we should have over 800 military bases and installations in 72 different countries and territories.
Right.
I also don't think that $778 billion should be spent on it. That's more than the next 15 countries combined, most of which are our allies. What is going on here?
Okay, especially when we're seeing the economic impacts that we're having with our working class here. This is what's impacting us the most. Okay, we can have a strong, robust military. We can have all the protections that we need without spending $778 billion and having our troops spread all around the world.
Now, with yourself running as a libertarian candidate, I guess let's just retrace here for a moment.
Yeah.
And, let's talk a little bit about why you're a libertarian. I mean, you're not only you're a libertarian, you're the chairman of the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. So, big
Oh,
ups on that. But you're running as a libertarian that libertarians traditionally don't necessarily win races. They don't necessarily, it's like they run and they get a message out and maybe somebody will adopt some of the planks that they're talking about. But I find when a libertarian is actually running, I find them to be more principled to the extent that they believe what they believe, that they don't have to run as a Republican, they don't have to run under the guise as a Democrat. They're running straight up as a libertarian. You don't have to wonder where they're coming from. What brought you into that thought process?
well, that's what the people deserve. I mean, the people deserve transparency. The people deserve to know what they're getting. And right now, we've heard over and over and over again politicians making promises of what they're going to do when they get to Washington, and within a term or two, they're bought and purchased by some major corporation. I don't want to be bought and purchased. I can't be bought and purchased by a major corporation. I actually happen to really, really enjoy my time here on my farm. But what I can tell you is that my oath to defend the Constitution of the United States did not stop when I took the uniform off. It still continues to this day. And that's my goals, is to continue to defend the Constitution of the United States. And until we get that back, we're going to continue to flounder. But I specifically chose the Libertarian Party because this is where my beliefs base align with the most. And we are never going to see change that this country needs coming from a Republican or a Democrat. We need to have multiple parties in there that actually represent us. Right now, you have two different factions in this country. You got one side that actually advocates that we are a multicultural democracy. The other side advocates that we are a constitutional republic. We technically, with a two-party system, we are a democracy. And that democracy is what's actually tearing this country apart. And we need to get back to the constitutional republic. And that only happens if we have multiple parties or no parties at all. That would be preferable. Preferably, your representative is your representative, and that is it. They are not a representative of a party. They are not a representative of a major corporation. They are the representative of the 8th Congressional District or the 1st Congressional District or whatever it may be. You are supposed to be the voice of the people. Unless you've got the integrity to do that, you shouldn't be running for office.
Now, when you said that no change really comes from Republicans or Democrats, um, how would you assert that? Well, what would a libertarian bring to the table then that would actually bring about any type of change?
Well, first off, is getting the message out and understanding that there's more libertarians it's getting the message out first. And we can also stand in the way. I mean, just look at the power that Joe Manchin just had standing in the way of this
Yeah.
legislation. That's what libertarians are going to do. Okay, who's standing in the way of bipartisan legislation? Bipartisan legislation means that they've agreed to screw us over. So that's the plan. We're going to stand in the way. We're going to actually work to repeal legislation that takes away your constitutional rights instead of adding on more and more legislation. We've got so many laws on the books right now. I believe the average American commits 3 felonies a day or something.
Yeah, it is.
So they just keep stacking laws on and laws on and laws on. And right now, what we're seeing is that the government will always have government solutions to government created problems. The Libertarian Party believes that you are the solution. You can solve your own problems. You don't need the government to tell you how to live your life. You don't need the government to tell you how to spend your money. This is how the country was founded. So let's repeal legislation. Let's actively work to start putting the wealth and prosperity back in the hands of the people, and the country will correct itself.
I don't think people realize how much government really infects their life. And I like to use that term infection because I don't see too much good on it. I mean, there are certain things I think that are good. You want to have occupational safety and health. I don't find anything wrong with having a MMSD, or MDSD, manual at a work site. So God forbid that you have a chemical burn, you know what to do.
Yeah.
But I think when you have, regulations on what constitutes a sausage pizza, when you have regulations on what type of piping you need to use for whatever project you're doing, or if you're trying to build a fence in your backyard, if it's over $1,000, you need to get a permit because God forbid government doesn't get its cut.
Yeah, and there's stuff that can happen on the private side as far as consumer protection that is not related with the government. Okay, the Better Business Bureau is a perfect example. In order to be able to get that BBB sticker on your front door, on the back of your vehicle or whatnot, there's certain criteria that you need to meet, and it costs you money to be a part of it. It's not cheap,
Mhm.
it's not free, so it's a long onboarding process. But once you receive that, the consumers know that this is the quality of a business that you are. So you can
Right.
then apply that to a lot of other things. Okay. So OSHA is another thing. You can have specific safety organizations on the private side that can come in, inspect businesses, because you know what, as an employee, I do want to have a safe workplace.
Mhm.
Okay. And if it's not safe, that's where we have unions and stuff coming in as well. But you can have private organizations that handle this stuff and have these organizations inspect businesses for them to be safe without government influence. And they can do it a whole lot cheaper with a much, much higher quality than the government ever could.
And I think we do see some of those private businesses doing that. I forget some of the name of them, but if you go into a grocery store, you ever see a dude walking around with a clipboard, he's usually from one of these organizations that, he's checking the back area to make sure everything's in compliance, making sure safety standards are met. And I know the larger, like your grocery stores, your Kroger's of the world, they hire these people on just to make sure that they're meeting safety standards that they themselves have put into place.
Yeah, there's that. And there's also, we have tremendous consumer protection tools with us right now, just leaving reviews on businesses.
Oh yeah.
Right. There's a lot of stuff that when this country first started coming out with consumer protections, we didn't have the technology that we have now today. The technology that we have now today is more useful for consumer protection than the government ever be able to pull off. So
But at the same time, isn't it kind of abused right now? Because you see, there's, let's take Yelp for example. Word of mouth is probably the best advertising and also the worst one because if you do have a good service or product, people will talk about it. They'll write a review. On the other side, if somebody's upset at you because God forbid you said something off color, it's like, oh no, don't go there. He's a hater. And we've seen that happen, I think, more so over the last, I'd say 3, 4 years. And it's kind of gotten ridiculous because it was like, well, what does your beef have to do with the service or product they're doing?
yeah, you are gonna come across those road ones where you cross somebody and they're just essentially being an ass.
Mhm.
And that's where you can reply on these sites and you can see where the company is actually trying to make amends.
Right.
And through a short conversation on that review, if you see personally, if I see the company doing what they need to do to try to make amends with a disgruntled customer, that's enough for me to ignore that comment.
Right.
So, I mean, if we can see effort putting in, and it's about being a smart consumer, and we can utilize other tools, and it's not perfect. It's not going to be a perfect system. You are going to have that, but most importantly, we're taking it out of the hands of corrupt bureaucrats and politicians that really don't give a shit.
Right.
So
So
we
with
have to
yourself
do
as a libertarian, one of the things that I've heard, and I heard Sheriff David Clark say this back in October of 21, he was saying he doesn't think that Washington can be changed. He said over the years, people have gone there with the intention of changing Washington, but Washington eventually almost always changes them. How would bringing in more people from different parties, how would could is it even possible to change Washington even by doing that?
if it's not possible to change Washington, why are we doing what we're doing? I mean, at that point, if it's not possible to change Washington, then we're in a whole lot more trouble than we all realize right now. I do believe we can change Washington. I do believe it's going to be a long, slow process. It took us a long, long time
Mhm.
to get here, but it starts with one. One's going to get in, then there'll be two, then there'll be 12, and it will continue to grow. We're going to try to keep this peaceful. It needs to stay peaceful. And that's one of the big things with the Libertarian Party is we have a non-aggression, two principles that we follow, okay? We have a non-aggression principle, which means you can't use force or the threat of force or violence or the threat of violence to force your political views. Okay? Real standard. We also believe in consent. When it comes to law, you must have consent. So as long as you're not forcing it on anybody and as long as everybody has consent, you can live your life however you choose to live your life. That message is growing and that message will take over Washington. It just takes one and it will continue to flow.
Well, that's and glad you brought that up because when you talk about messaging and non-aggressive principles, one of the things that we've seen, especially over the last several years, is this hyper aggression. We've seen the violence from, all the riots of of 2020. We've seen, Antifa cause all the havoc that it has, and that really doesn't sway anybody's opinion for too long, other than to create fear. You find most movements tend to galvanize support through non-aggressive principles. I mean, we live in an era now where we're dealing more with fourth and fifth generational warfare. We're dealing with propaganda, winning hearts and minds, that type of thing. When you're talking about libertarian principles, how is that coming over to people that have been inundated for years with mainstream media, that are so fixated in their tribalist beliefs? How does that resonate with the people that you've talked to?
When you tie in those two principles with local legislation, you can apply that down to where everybody wins. So if this is how you want your community to work and function, we don't care as long as you follow these two principles. It's actually a breath of fresh air for most that have been trapped within this two-party system that are looking for something new. Now you're going to have those dedicated that are never going to leave the Republican Party, that are never ever going to leave the Democratic Party. They are cemented in for all of eternity, and that's fine. But the vast, vast majority of Americans are more independent thinking than they are Republican or Democrat. I think the last poll, there's a Gallup poll that I watch quite regularly. It was, I believe, 26% of Americans identify as Democrat, 28% identify as Republican, and 46% identify as independent.
Mhm.
So when I'm having these conversations with people and I apply these two principles and I walk it down to local legislation, this is how everybody can win. Okay, when you vote Republican or you vote Democrat, you are voting for a set of values to be placed across the entirety of the country when half of the country doesn't believe in those values.
Right.
Okay, and that's why it's divisive. When you vote Libertarian, you are voting to protect everybody's values equally. It's called self governance. That's how this country was founded. And when you are able to follow the two principles of the non aggression and compliance, self governance is the way that we can actually unite this country where Republicans and Democrats can't.
One of the things that's had a huge concern for me over the last few years, especially since March of 2020, when COVID was declared a pandemic here in the States, was there's a lot of people we saw buckle under pressure, whether it
Right.
was from mask mandates, vaccines, you name it. They did what they were told. And I have come to the belief that you mentioned self-governance. I think a lot of people are okay with abdicating any type of self-responsibility, any type of self-governance. They actually they yearn for someone to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
And I find that to be a very sad state of affairs here in America because that's not who I feel like Obama now. That's not who we are.
And you know what? You're right. But when you apply those two principles and you're doing that within your local community, that's fine. If that's how you choose to live your life, if you want to have an authoritarian neighborhood watch that looks over your whole community and dictates everything that you want to do, as long as you're not forcing it on anybody and as long as everybody consents, that's fine. Be told what to do.
That's going to be an interesting one. How do you get an entire neighborhood to consent to anything? You know, I have a hard time like having like 50% of the discussions like in line with my wife. Like it's just she pretty much governs, and
Yeah.
I do what she tells me. My consent is trying to maintain stability in the household and peace. But that's a whole nother story there.
We could do a whole podcast on just that one.
Oh God, we can. It's not a democracy here at home. It's Happy wife saved your life.
Exactly. Yep. I
Let's
understand.
let's transition here into some of the issues in your platform.
Yeah.
And one of the things for me personally, I I try to see things in shades of gray because I know the world is not just purely black and white.
Yep.
But in my mind, there are certain things that are black and white.
Yep.
Your best example of it, Second Amendment. Like
Yeah.
I personally think if there's a tank out there and I can buy it fully functional, I should be able to have it on my driveway.
Just
You
make sure
know,
you tell your buddy Jake here to come and drive it with you.
yeah, right. We come driving it down the road here. Yeah. Good times, on the way for some brats and burgers and beers, all that good stuff. But I'm an absolutist that way. I believe that when they said your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, literally meant that.
Yep.
And I have to agree with Justice Antonin Scalia, when he even said that the Second Amendment is not absolute. Having read the Federalist Papers, it's absolute. My question is, when you look at your platform here, I think you kind of talk about that, especially with the opposition of any laws requiring registration, and anything else like that. I was hoping you could elaborate some on there.
Yeah, so we word it a little bit differently. You have an unalienable right to self-defense, and that is self-defense to anything up to and including our own government, which means if they've got it, we should be able to have it as well. So what we're seeing right now is weaponry that we can't have. The government gets to pick and choose who can and can't, and that's how you end up with Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Those are privately owned organizations. Why do they get to have all the big cool guns? Why
Right.
can't I have the big cool guns? I want the big cool guns. If I was going to shoot pumpkins out in the backyard, but that's a different story. So we have an unalienable right to self-defense, and I will um, guard and defend that, and that's what it comes down to. When you start
Right.
talking about registration and stuff like that, that's just a money-making tool for the state for them to draw revenue off of. It has nothing to do with protection. If you want to protect people, train them on how to shoot. Train them on how to actually defend themselves. Tell them to be accurate. I mean, there has to be some kind of you can't the government isn't the resolve to be able to protect people. So
Right.
when you hear a lot of the things that we talk about within the Libertarian Party, it does fall a lot back onto you. When we talk about self-governance, there's also responsibility that comes with that. Okay. I think it was Ronald Reagan that says with freedom comes great responsibility. And it is very, very true. And that goes back to what you said earlier. There's some people that just don't want to take on that stuff. They would just
Right.
rather be told what to do. And that's the same thing that happens with guns. People want to be told what to do. People want to utilize the government to protect themselves from the big bad guns. And that's just never going to happen. You can protect yourself. And that's what should be moving forward with.
Well, I think a lot of people don't seem to understand. It's like, why weren't the police to save me or be here or whatever? And it's like, if you understand the concept of policing, be it historically or in present day, you need to understand that policing is reactionary. It's not proactive. At best, law enforcement becomes proactive when you have, say, broken windows theory, when you have more patrols in an area trying to deter crime. But all that really does is, move crime to other areas where law enforcement doesn't have a heavier presence. The most proactive thing I think a person can do is understand their Second Amendment right and get involved in training. Because for someone like me, and I advocate this to everybody, there's no such thing as bad training.
Nope. And then again, when I talk about things like local communities and local communities coming together, okay, especially when it comes to policing, okay, nobody knows better or what policing should look like in their communities than their own communities themselves. Okay.
Mhm.
Madison in the state of Wisconsin does not know what we need here in Door County, Wisconsin, as far as policing. And Washington, D.C. certainly doesn't know what we need here. So when we talk about bringing everything back down local, especially all of our tax dollars back down local, that's so that we can fund our police department so they can be what they should be. They're here to serve and protect.
Right.
Okay. But what that looks like is up to our communities. The education our police officers should have. If you want them to have a police officer background along with a psychological background, cool. But they better be paid adequately for that as well. That's a lot of training. Okay. So we can design custom police forces that fit our communities. We can have custom government that fits our
Mhm.
local communities that best affect our local communities in the most positive manner. You can't do that at the state and federal levels. That's why when we talk about even guns, okay, again, we go back to those two principles. It's not forced on anybody, and as long as everybody consents, if you want no guns and abolish guns out of your community, then fine, then you can abolish guns out of your community.
Right.
Don't force it. And as long as everybody's okay with it and they consent, feel free.
Well, it's interesting because over the last 2 years, the defund the police movement has gained a lot of traction. And it's certainly waned, I'd say, over the last 6 to maybe even 9 months. But it was real big, obviously, in 2020 into 21. And we saw cities that were actually actively defunding their police departments, systematically taking it apart. Whereas I think if the issues that a lot of these folks had wanted to be addressed, I would think that you would want to fund the police even more, and not so much for armament. I get the whole escalation, but I think if you're trying to do things to de-escalate, you want to, as you said, pay your officers accordingly and give them the training that they need in order to, say, be crisis interventional specialists, that God forbid they ever have to draw a weapon, but if they do, they have to. Because I think
Yep.
the idea of sending social workers out to like a domestic violence situation is just, it's lunacy.
You're right, and it all comes down to your local area and what's actually needed, and we can develop that on the fly as needed.
Mm.
And when it comes to actually defunding the police, we do need to take a look at how police departments are getting funded, but that's a big picture thing right now with our
Right.
current tax code. Um, I don't like the idea that we have so many tax dollars going to Washington and then trickle back down. Okay, that's
Mhm.
the opposite of what this should be. All of our tax dollars should be staying local. And that's actually kind of counter to my party's platform of taxation is theft. I do believe that that's a little bit too much of a shock and awe to people to walk that back. But
Right.
if we can keep our tax dollars local, okay, that's when we can have the most impact on our communities. That's when we have the police departments, the fire departments, and it all comes together. So when it comes to the actual defunding the police, if it was the defunding from the federal level and our tax dollars were returned so that we could then also refund our police departments adequately where it was needed, I would definitely be on board with that.
Right. Another issue that oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, when it comes to we happen a lot of areas here in Northeast Wisconsin in the 8th Congressional District, we have really good police officers, okay? But that doesn't mean that there are other places like Los Angeles and Chicago and
Mhm.
New York that have bad police officers. So there is something to be said with the qualified immunity that protects those bad police officers that we do advocate to actually resolve, and not just qualified immunity for police. There's immunity for all levels of government that should be eradicated and taken away. You're a government official. You
Mhm.
should be held to an extraordinary high standard, a higher standard than what we are as the populace, and that's not the case. Especially in Washington D.C., no one's held accountable in Washington D.C. I mean, even Hillary Clinton was just fined what $8,000 for that dog.
For the Steele dossier.
Yeah, what a
Yeah.
joke. What an absolute joke. But we have to hold our government officials accountable. So when we talk about local legislation and shrinking the overall size of the government, that means we have less and less corruption to deal with. And we don't have to deal with any of these big issues like defunding the police because everything is taken care of and our police officers are currently held accountable. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Well, that brings up, you mentioned Hillary Clinton and the fine that she got for the whole Steele dossier. If we look at that, that is something that literally everybody kind of went along with this whole idea that there was Russian collusion, Russian collusion. We heard that for 2 years. There was an entire impeachment upon that. And it was all built upon a false narrative. And it has been debunked ever since then. How do you how do we prevent this going forward, especially if you were to get elected into Congress? You're one of 435.
Yep. Like I said, it's going to be a big process. It's going to take time to walk all this back. So I'm not going there to propose new legislation. I'm going there to actually repeal legislation. So there's a bill that's sitting in Congress right now with Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene to actually end the Department of Education. I will
Yes.
definitely sign on with that. Okay, there'll be a third name on there. There's other government agencies that we can drop and just get rid of. Okay, let's start working this stuff back. Let's start repealing these organizations, these double organizations. So the EPA and the DNR. What's the difference? They're trying to accomplish the same job, and it's just a waste of our tax dollars. So in Washington, to make the changes that we need, it is going to take a very, very long time. And I'm not going to promise you the whole world that I'm going to get to Washington, D.C. and make miraculous changes, because you're right.
Right.
I am one of 435. I am a realist in what I'm trying to do here and what I'm trying to accomplish. But in order to start the proper moves to get this country drawn back to our constitutional republic where we, the people, have a voice, we need to be able to have individuals that will want to go to Congress or Senate and only be there for 1 or 2 terms.
Right.
I don't want to go and do this for forever. I happen to really enjoy getting home from work, coming out of the field here, pouring a glass of whiskey, and sitting in the front yard with my wife, watching the dogs and the chickens run around. I love it. That's my happy spot. I don't think Washington, D.C. is going to be my happy spot.
Yeah, which seems like it'd be a little too crowded over there, considering all the open field you have. Now, you mentioned something I think that's really important that needs to be highlighted here, because there are politicians out here right now, and I like them. I do. I think they're great people. Had an opportunity to meet a bunch of them, but they've been in office forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never what the founders intended it to be. And I go back to, I always go back to the reading of the Federalist Papers. I go back to, the writings of Jefferson and Locke. And one of the things that they were really talking about was the citizen legislator. The idea that, Joe Shoemaker over there, he's going to become a congressman, go to DC for a few terms. And then when he's done, he's going to go back to his shop and start making his shoes again.
Yes, that's how it's supposed to be, especially with the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is supposed to literally be the voice of the House of the people.
Yes.
That's why it's called the House of Representatives. Your farmers, your plumbers, your teachers, your doctors, your attorneys, okay, your truck drivers. That's what's supposed to be in the House of Representatives. The common folk, as the elitists will call us, okay?
Right.
That's who is supposed to be sitting there. Okay, and that's one of the things that really bothers me about my opponent's background, is he is gearing up and has always wanted to be a career politician. Take a look at his educational background, where he's done and what he's worked for. He's always been in government. He intends to never leave government, and if he does, he'll be working with the military-industrial complex. Okay, which is fine. That's his prerogative. It is a free country. But we cannot continue to elect career politicians. We need to get everyday regular Joes or Janes elected into these seats. They have to be the representative of the people. And that's going to be a big push for the change that we need. And the day that I'm not doing a bad job, vote me out. Get me out of there. I'm fine.
Right.
Okay? We, the people, hold the power to do this. And I get asked regularly about term limits and what my thoughts and feelings are on term limits, okay? And I did hear some counter arguments to term limits that I'm actually no longer actually in favor of term limits, because most people actually, when they're advocating for term limits, I look right back at them. I said, is it control of your legislature that you want, or is it term limits that you want?
Mm-hmm.
If you get a good legislator in there that actually is defending you and is being the voice of the people, do you want to cut their job out shortly?
Right.
Okay. So if it's control of your legislature that you're looking for, because every single time I've asked that question, they said, yeah, it's control of the legislature. I think only one time I've asked, and they're like, nope, I want control of the legislature and I want term limits. So, I mean, by far none. The American people want control of their legislature.
Mm-hmm.
They see that obtained through term limits. Now, if we do install term limits, what's going to happen is nobody's going to run against an incumbent. Trust me,
Right.
It takes a lot of resources and a lot of energy. Right now, Congress has, a 19% approval rating with a 93% reelection rating, okay? So with a 93% reelection rating, who's going to run against an incumbent versus just waiting out their term and running that.
It's funny you say that, because if you look at the approval, like you said, 19% approval, you look at any state legislative body, their approval is tanked. And yet, if you ask most people about their congressional, representative, their senator, boy, they love them.
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of funny, but it's because it's not my guy, it's always someone else.
Correct. And there's a lot. One of the first things that libertarians do is we first teach. So I never, when I step into a crowd or start talking about my platform, I never talk first. I never blast people with the libertarian message. I let them talk and ask them what their concerns are, and then I actually apply what libertarians would do to try to resolve it. And every single time that they point out an issue, you can lead back to the government causing the issue. Okay? The government causes problems. We feel that you live your best life when you are the most free. And it's true. If you leave people up to their own devices, they're going to make good decisions. So if you believe the country is filled with bad people, then you're going to want to regulate that and hold everybody. Or if you feel that the country is filled with good people, okay? We can do this. This isn't hard. This isn't rocket science. And we can fix this as long as we stop electing corrupt corporate politicians. And that's what we see a lot.
Well, I think it's important that you mentioned that, if this is something that didn't happen overnight, and it will take some time to change the system, to change, how Washington works.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that, in the interim, as you're working on that, what is it that you yourself as a congressional representative, once, if you were to become elected, what was the value, the value proposition that you bring for the state of Wisconsin to be the biggest advocate for Wisconsin? Because I think what we've seen over the last few years, especially, is a massive overreach of the federal government into the state level. And I think, we definitely need more congressmen, more senators that are going to say, hey, enough's enough. Yeah. Not on my turf.
You're absolutely right. And that we have the 10th Amendment that literally spells that directly out.
Mm-hmm.
So we see this regularly where we take our politicians, especially at the Congress, not especially, but all of our politicians swear an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. And it's we, the people, that are responsible to hold them accountable to that. Okay? If they're not following the Constitution of the United States, stop voting for them. Stop voting for them. So what I have found now, actually running here, there's actually very, very few people that actually want to run for public office.
Right.
So that's part of the problem. There is we need more constitutionally driven individuals, freedom loving, liberty loving, justice loving individuals to step up and run. Okay, and trust me, it's not an easy task. It is a sacrifice on not just myself and my free time. It's a sacrifice on your family, your children. It's a lot of time that we dedicate to this, and a lot of resources that we dedicate to be able to do this. And it will come around. It will come around, but we need people to be able to stand in the way of the current machine before it starts to actually change itself around.
One of the things that's been, that we're paying for right now, and we kind of were talking about this off air earlier, but I think this is important because it seems that every action that Congress takes, every action that a state legislative body takes, inevitably ends up costing the average person in terms of their pocketbook. Since COVID came about, from May of 2020, excuse me, when the CARES Act first came out, up until present date, we have over 40% of all the U.S. dollars that are currently in circulation right now. That number is staggering. Like, I can't even fathom that number.
8 trillion.
Right. And again, $40 billion trying to go out to Ukraine. And we've had housing moratoriums and the devaluation of the dollar, the collapse of the dollar as it is right now. Mm-hmm. We talked about earlier, stock markets collapse, crypto markets are collapsing. Interest rates are starting to spike up here, 75 basis points in the last few months. How do you start in that area to try to, I guess, is it even possible considering the damage that Congress has done. I mean, one person, yes, I believe in compound interest, but that's Herculean, I think, at best.
Yeah, in order to try to get our country's financial situation back under control, first we have to tie our dollar back to gold. That has to be step one. Two, we have to do away with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is one who's controlling our dollar right now when it should be controlled through the free market attached to gold. Okay, and we see the power of tying your dollar back to gold because we just saw Russia do it, and look at the impact
Hmm.
that it had within the Russian economy. Okay, it's possible, but our current politicians don't want to do that because they want to have control. If they have control of our dollar, they have control of the markets, they have control of the masses. So unless we have a bunch of politicians willing to tie the dollar back to gold, you're right. It's going to be a real rough ride, and it's probably going to come crashing down well before it gets fixed.
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned that because, yeah, even with all the sanctions after the invasion into Ukraine, the ruble ends up tanking, and then it bounced back within, I think it was 2 weeks, back to where it
Yeah,
was prior to invasion.
correct.
And then now you have Russia talking about, hey, if you're going to be buying oil from us, you're going to be taking your dollars or whatever currency, using
Hmm.
our banks and using rubles.
Correct.
And now you got the Chinese saying, you know what? We're going to start buying oil from Saudi Arabia or whomever else, and we're going to start using the yuan. How about that?
Yeah.
The petrodollar is doomed at this particular point. That's my take. I'm not an economist. I just play one on the internet.
Nope. I just, and I can't argue with you. And as soon as that oil dollar goes away, that's when the American dollar is going to completely crash, and where this country is in some serious deep water. And we see it. I mean, they're already talking about recession. I do not. I would not be one bit shocked if we were in a full blown recession by September and October, and I would not be surprised if we had grocery stores empty of food, or at least
Mhm.
half empty of food by November and December. Okay, this is coming. They're all talking about it, but we have to get our dollar tied back in to gold
Mhm.
or any kind of precious metal, and we have to get rid of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is what is controlling everything, and that's an unelected board of bureaucrats that they're not even voted in place. They're
No,
appointed.
it's a private company too.
Yeah. Why
That's the
do we the people allow this to continue to happen? Okay, again, so this really all does come back down to we the people voting the proper people in place. Okay.
right.
Unfortunately, the machine has continued to stomp out all other voices. I'm not the only libertarian that's running. There may be I might there's we have another libertarian running in the 3rd congressional district as well. We do have a Senate candidate. We got a Secretary of State candidate and several state seats that we are running.
Hmm.
And that's just Wisconsin. We've got piles of libertarians running all over the United States. Okay, last November, everyone talked about the big red wave that happened out on the East Coast. We
Right.
also had over 200 libertarians elected. Was anybody talking about that? We doubled our elected body in one election. Absolutely incredible. So this is growing. We are growing. We just have to. We the people got to start paying attention to who's out there, and this is where platforms like this help get the message spread. So thank you.
Well, and I'm so happy to be able to help out and to have this conversation with you. But that leads me to another question. I think that's really pertinent to yourself as the state chair, and I think to libertarians as a whole. Clearly, we know the mainstream media is not on anybody's side other than the radical left,
Yeah.
and I highlight it as such because nobody's been able to prove it otherwise to me. Conservatives generally tend to have we got a presence somewhere, but we don't have control of cultural institutions. And we kind of rely on, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, the Dinesh D'Souza's, and a couple platforms here and there. And, we sit and we whine about whatever and just kind of leave it at that. Is there a libertarian media apparatus that is either in existence in the formation, because I think that's one of the things that's really helpful in getting the message across is to literally try to amass something like that, even if it's just one person.
Yeah, I'm personally in the works right now with a gentleman named Jess Heisel, and we are actively working to build the Wisconsin Independent News Network, the WIN Network. And this is going to be the one-stop shop for everything that is not Republican and not Democrat. So this is going to be the place where all third-party candidates can showcase all third parties. I don't care if it's the Green Party, the Constitution Party. I actually met tonight with the Forward Party. They've got a movement going on here in Wisconsin as well. So once they're up and established, they're going to probably be jumping on with this as well. But you're right. We need to be able to have resources for people to come and find other candidates outside of the mainstream media. And we are working to build that too. And that's going to take us a minute to get up and rolling. We do have a weekly podcast that we do Wednesdays at 7. That's Chasing Liberty with Jake and Looking Forward with Jess Heisel. We've teamed up. And we're slowly going to start building that because you're right. We do need to combat the mainstream medias and start getting more voices out there other than just the Ben Shapiro's of the world or the Tim Pools that
Right.
are growing. But it's also going to take some time for the market to bounce back. Okay, so just take into account the amount of that has changed just in the last 5 years technologically. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the viewership of these mainstream media news networks is just dropping.
Oh,
Okay?
it's tanking.
It
And
is
by the way,
tanking
rest
bad.
in peace, CNN Plus.
Yes,
I mean,
that not gonna lie,
all 23 days of you, that was delicious. I'm not even gonna pretend.
but think about what that says about us as a country as a whole. Okay, we're
Yeah.
tired of this mainstream media stuff. Okay, the older generation, and it typically goes via generation. So I've been very, very careful to actually watch when I'm talking about my message. It is actually a little bit different depending on the generation. The
Yes.
older generations, they are very, very cemented in 1970s, 1980s politics. It's still the same thing. And unfortunately, that's who we have elected in Washington, D.C. right now. When you start getting into the younger generations, they're not watching cable news. None of them are.
No.
Well, maybe a handful are. I can't say none of them, but they're all watching podcasts. They're all on YouTube. They're all on Facebook and Twitter and in all the other social media platforms. So this is where people are consuming their news. And this is where the future is. Believe it or not, I've heard a couple of quotes that the rate that technology is growing right now, the government can be essentially obsolete in the next 10 to 15 years.
I
Okay.
believe that.
Okay. We're going to, we as people are going to start functioning outside the government. We can 3D print guns.
Mhm.
So tack on all the registrations you want. I'll buy the printer and just start printing them.
Right.
What are you going to do? You come take my printer? I mean, or you're going to get registrations on printers? I mean, the technology is growing at such a rapid rate. I'm actually a wholeheartedly belief that what we're seeing now from our government is the Hail Mary to try to maintain as much power as they can for as long as they can. Because
Well, I
eventually,
think that's, you and I are probably old enough to remember when there was a time where it was said the biggest problem with people as a whole is the lack of information, the lack of knowledge.
yep,
And hey, I get it, man. I grew up and I learned math on an abacus, right? I didn't learn with sticks and rocks like my son actually jokes me about, but I learned on an abacus. Um, we actually had chalk on the chalkboard
yep,
and
real
encyclopedia,
talk.
right? Real chalk, and when we weren't eating it, we were drawing on it. But the Encyclopedia Britannica was ridiculously expensive. So you spent a lot of time at the library.
Yep.
Got to know the Dewey Decimal System. But
Card
today,
catalog, exactly.
right.
Yep.
But this right here,
Yep.
that's the knowledge of the world. The Library of Alexandria exists in here. And I feel like we have become dumber as a society. It's like the movie Idiocracy, except like the script is even worse.
Yeah.
With all the information we have here.
I think we're still adjusting yet to the new technology. We as a species are still trying to be able to absorb. The technology is advancing faster than we are.
Yes.
Which is why you're starting to see a lot of the disinformation and stuff come out of there. It's almost irresponsible.
Well, it's propaganda. It's the fourth and fifth generational warfare, no doubt.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the stuff that we have to be cautious of. And now that they're trying to develop was it disinformation czar or something like that?
Yeah.
What come?
Government is going to dictate what is real, what is not, and even if you see it with your own eyes, don't believe it. It is so extremely Orwellian that, and this is where it goes back to our earlier conversation. I think there are people that want to be told what to believe, what's true, what's not, rather
Yeah.
than trusting those beautiful gelatinous orbs we have in our head.
I promise you that there are as well. I can't contest that, and that's why when I talk about local communities
Mm,
and following our two basic principles of non-aggression and consent, everybody wins.
yeah.
So if you want to live in a community where you're told what to do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you want to have a socialist community, if you want to have a don't care. Don't force it on anybody. As long as everybody has consent, live your life. If you want to live it in the shadows, live in the shadows. If you want to live it with your head in the sand, listening to propaganda, then listen to the propaganda. But we hold that power. We hold that power
Hmm.
of choice. And what is standing in our way of growing our communities and living our most freest life is the government.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something, shout out to Jen Secchi for that one. But I want to circle back to this here because you said something about technology. And I heard a stat several years ago that said that if you were to go out right now and you bought the latest, greatest computer out there and it was brand new, just came in the store today, it is already 6 months outdated
Yep.
because of the rate that technology has moved. My
Yeah.
my youngest son is 10 years old, and he would ask me about video games from the Atari 2600 back in the day. And I was like, man, it's so different because everything's so realistic and the graphics keep getting better every single year. Technology continues to move at such a rapid pace that I think, to your point about government could be potentially obsolete within 10 to 15 years, you look at what the internet and what we're doing right here, how can we make that obsolete? We build the very word that you had said, communities. And
Yes.
these communities are, I think, and I've seen this on several forums where people have been very helpful to one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it starts.
We'll just look at so everyone. For me, I was in when the planes hit the World Trade Center. I was actually in high school. Okay,
Mm,
I was actually already enlisted in Wisconsin Army National Guard before I signed up at the end of my junior year. I rolled into my senior year in high school when the planes hit the World Trade Center, and I was in shock and awe. But it was 9/12. 9/12 to me was more impactful than
yeah.
9/11. By far none. Okay, that's America. That's still here.
Hmm.
We can still come together, and it doesn't matter who it is or who has attacked us. When push come to shove, we're going to stand together. We will help our neighbors. We are good people. We're not
Yeah.
evil people. So when we talk about the government needing to fix this and fix that and fix that, we don't need that. We have neighbors. We have good people within our communities that can help us out. Every time I've needed help with something, someone showed up. People have showed up to help me when I didn't even need help. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. And I have reached out to help people even when they didn't need it. But so there's that the golden rule of love thy neighbor. Treat your neighbor as you treat yourself. If we focused on that,
Mhm.
okay, the world would be a whole lot better place. We can, and that's one of the main principles of the Libertarian Party. What we do as well is we actively go out and feed the homeless. Okay, we are
Right.
actively out cleaning up the highways. We just had last weekend our Fox Valley affiliate here did a Fox River watershed cleanup. We've got Mr. Chris Nass that every single year he does a Kickapoo River cleanup. So we are
Mhm.
actively out in our communities doing exactly what we're preaching, okay, and actually doing the things that most people count on the government to do. We're like, no, we'll do it, okay?
Right.
We don't need the government. We're going to do it. So that when we talk about communities, we talk about doing that stuff as well, okay? Adopt a highway, go and help clean up part of the highway. It takes a little bit of time, but if we take that little bit of time, the whole world's a much more beautiful place.
I think a lot of people underestimate the value of service to others. And when you look at something like that, it becomes memorable. And, I've long been a believer of this in that people remember how you make them feel. And if they see you out there, participating in one of these events, they're going to remember that because they're like, man, somebody actually took some time out of their day to make this place a better place overall.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think that also translates politically. We've going back to the career politician and everything. I think we've gotten away from that idea and it's almost become a talking point. Well, I'm here to serve. Is it really you're here to serve or is this service to your fellow man? Well, what are we doing here?
Yep, I get it. And that's why I enjoy teaching. That's one of my favorite things to do. I got a big head filled with stupid knowledge on a million different things that most. I mean, we could do a 3-hour podcast just on
Easily.
growing vegetables and what goes into that. And I started out this nonprofit organization so that I can teach. And you want to see me in my full element? It's out there in the greenhouse teaching veterans how to trellis the tomatoes or trellis the cucumbers and how the microbes in the soil work
Right.
and diving
Practical
into
application.
practical applications. We're getting these veterans into beehives. We've got 2 beehives going right now, stacked double, and I'm teaching them how to actually manage the beehives, which is a whole. Oh, we could do a 3-hour podcast on the beehives. I mean, there's so much vast knowledge. I enjoy teaching,
Right.
and that's my service to the community. Me going to Washington, I'm going to stand in the way. I'm going there to repeal legislation. I'm going there to be the tip of the spear to let other libertarians into office, to
Right.
prove that we are here for this fight. We are here to defend this country. We are here for liberty and justice for all, just in the same manner that our founding fathers had designed, because that is what is important. Us coming together as the community, and we can keep this government in control.
Right. Well, and at this point, we really need some roadblocks in the way here because with the overreaching government that we've experienced, especially over the last 2 years, and they don't show any signs of slowing up.
No,
Very incompetently, but they're not slowing up.
they're growing. They're going to continue to grow, and that's what helps maintain their power. And it's the I don't know if many of the viewers have probably have already heard the frog in the boiling water.
Yes.
Okay, when you first put the frog in there, it's room temperature, but they just slowly turn the heat up. We've been in the boiling water now for so long, we do not see how far away we've gotten from the Constitution. And part of that, so here's part of the scheme that they do. Okay, the battle we've been led to believe is Republican versus Democrat. That's
Mhm.
not the political battle. The political battle is we the people versus an authoritarian government. That's the political battle.
Yep.
So if
Well,
we
and
can focus on that, okay, that's why the power of our 2 principles and local legislation and it coming together is how we fight that authoritarian government.
I think it's important to keep that in mind too, because really, what have we seen over the last several years? More and more of an authoritarian government under the guise of being a constitutional republic.
Mhm.
The idea if you don't wear a mask, then you're going to face a potential fine or maybe arrest. The idea that if you don't, get this medical procedure, you're going to lose your job.
Yeah.
I don't know how much more about, actually, I do know how much more authoritarian it can go, but it does go down a very dark path. Um, all right. I'm going to go with the final question here. Running for Congress. Well, it's not even really a question. I'm going to give you the closing statement here because I always want to do that. I wanted to make sure that we ran an extra 15 minutes long because obviously we had some tech problems on the get-go, and I really thank you for bearing with us here because I know you had some issues there, and we got on there, so I wanted to make sure we gave you the full hour and then some on this one here.
I definitely appreciate that. Thank you all for stumbling through my tech issues here. Thank you.
No problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove myself off screen here for a moment, but I want to let you have the last few minutes here. Talk about yourself, talk about the congressional race, and, again, check out the website, jakeliberty2022.com. I'm going to hand it over to you.
I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight. It's definitely been an honor not only to be the chairman of the Libertarian Party of the state of Wisconsin, but also to run for the 8th Congressional District here. I've got over a year and a half invested into this campaign, and I have met some of the most amazing people along the way with the mask mandate protests and the medical mandates, and just being out within the communities and being able to meet all of you. Um, this is really a truly an honor for me, and it would be a true honor to be able to be your representative in the 8th Congressional District here in Washington, D.C. So if you can, please check out my website, www.jakeliberty2022.com. Obviously, every campaign needs donations so we can help reach the masses. And if you're interested in helping gather signatures or helping go door to door and taking a bigger role within the campaign, definitely send me a message. If you're interested in learning more about the Libertarian Party in itself, you can find information on that at www.lpwi.org. We are definitely growing. We got affiliates popping up all over the state. And join us. Join us in this fight for liberty. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Jacob, I want to thank you once again for, being on the show here tonight. Really enjoy this conversation. And of course, I want to invite you back at any point. If you ever want to come back on, let me know. We'll set it up. I'm looking forward to seeing what you're bringing to the table here. And especially, the Wisconsin Independent News Network. That is something that I personally think is long overdue.
We're working on it. It's a big project, and we want to make sure that we're kicking it off right the first time. So we're crossing T's and dotting I's and getting it all ironed out. But that's something I'm very, very passionate about, making sure that we, the people, have more options than just the red pill or the blue pill. Because when it comes down to it, they no longer serve us. They no longer serve we, the people. It's very, very clear on both sides of the aisle. They vote first for their donors. They vote second for their party. Third, maybe they'll vote on behalf of their constituency.
And that's a big maybe in a lot of cases.
A very big maybe in a lot of, and that's a sad state of affairs for the country. But we are here. We are here for the fight. We are here for the long haul. And we are our only goal, the Libertarian Party, our only goal is a world set free in our lifetime.
And you can't argue with that. And to me, that would be a beautiful thing. And in the end, we can all be left alone if we so choose to.
Exactly.
All right, Jacob. Again, thank you so much, sir. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm definitely would love to have you back on.
Thank you, Ed. You have yourself a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, guys, that was Jacob VandenPlas here. It was a really great conversation here. And thank you guys for bearing with us with the tech issues on the onset. These things are going to happen. Like I said earlier on, we did a sound check. Everything clicked off right. We decided to go live. Boom. That's when things had to go sideways. But it's all right. These things do happen. But again, I want to thank you guys for joining in here. If you guys are watching on YouTube, or if you do go out and check us out on YouTube, make sure you're subscribing. Hit the notification bell, and when you watch these episodes, smash that like button, because you know what? It hooks a brother up here. Again, thank you to our guest here, Jacob VandenPlas from the Libertarian Party, as he runs for the 8th Congressional District. We will have more shows lined up here next week. I don't have any guests lined up just yet, but I will be reaching out to more folks here, and we'll be having conversations with everybody, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, and we'll see where everything goes from there. So thank you guys very much. Good night. God bless you. God bless Wisconsin. God bless the United States of America. I'm out.